The morning sun cast long shadows across New Geneva's crystalline towers, where Ambassador Elena Vasquez sipped her coffee and watched the news feeds with practiced calm. 3,000 years of galactic peace had made mornings like this routine. Peaceful, predictable, boring even. The Galactic Council had just announced another trade agreement between the Zephyrian Empire and the Crystalline Collective. The kind of diplomatic victory that would have once sparked celebrations across human space. Elena barely glanced at the holographic display showing happy aliens shaking appendages in agreement. Humanity had grown comfortable in its role as the galaxy's mediators, the species everyone trusted to broker deals and settle disputes. It was a good life, she supposed, but sometimes she wondered if her ancestors who had fought in the old wars might have found more purpose in their struggles. Her peaceful contemplation shattered when her personal communicator erupted in urgent crimson alerts. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor as she read the message that would change everything. The hegemony, a collection of 12 aggressive species from the Outer Rim, had just declared war on the entire Galactic Council. Not a trade dispute, not a territorial disagreement, but total war aimed at conquest and subjugation. Elena's fingers flew across her workstation as she pulled up the official declaration. The hegemony's supreme war chancellor, a towering insectoid, creature named Vexthar, spoke with venomous authority from the central broadcast. His chittering voice translated into cold, mechanical words that chilled her blood. The peaceful species of the inner galaxy were weak, he declared. Their time of dominance was over. The hegemony would sweep across their worlds like a cleansing fire, bringing proper order to a galaxy gone soft. The declaration outlined their demands with brutal simplicity. Complete surrender within one solar cycle, followed by the dissolution of all existing governments. Species would be classified into useful categories: workers, soldiers, or biomass for their growing fleets. Those who resisted would face extinction. The hegemony had spent centuries building their war machine in secret, far beyond the reach of Council scouts, and now they were ready to claim what they saw as their rightful inheritance. Elena's hands trembled as she forwarded the message to the emergency council session. Within minutes, her office filled with the frantic chatter of diplomatic channels exploding into chaos. The Zephyrians were already mobilizing their defense fleets, while the crystalline collective's normally serene representatives spoke in rapid, crystalline chimes of barely controlled panic. Even the ancient ethereal minds, beings of pure energy who rarely involved themselves in physical concerns, were broadcasting distress signals across subspace. As Earth's primary representative to the Galactic Council, Elena had seen many crises over her 30-year career, but nothing like this. The galaxy had enjoyed peace for so long that many species had converted their military fleets into cargo vessels or exploration ships. The younger generations had never known war, viewing it as an ancient barbarism that civilized beings had outgrown. The hegemony seemed to be counting on exactly that kind of complacency. Her secure line buzzed with an incoming call from Geneva Command. Director Harrison's weathered face appeared on the screen, his expression grim but strangely calm. Behind him, she could see the bustling activity of the crisis center, staffers moving with the quick efficiency that came from extensive emergency drills. Elena had always wondered why Earth maintained such elaborate war preparation protocols when the galaxy had been at peace for millennia. Now she was beginning to understand. "Elena, we need you back on Earth immediately," Harrison said without preamble. "The Council is calling an emergency session, and every species representative is expected to attend in person. The transport ship Aurora is already en route to your position and will arrive within 6 hours. Pack light and prepare for an extended stay." Elena nodded, though her mind was racing with implications. If they were recalling all ambassadors to Earth rather than holding the session at the usual neutral space station, something significant was happening. Earth hadn't hosted a full council session in over 200 years, preferring to let other species take center stage in galactic politics. The symbolism alone would send ripples throughout the galaxy. As she prepared to leave her comfortable posting on Kepler Station, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was witnessing the end of an era, The peace that had defined her entire life was crumbling, and with it, the careful diplomatic order that humanity had helped build. Yet something in Director Harrison's tone suggested that Earth wasn't as unprepared for this moment as the rest of the galaxy seemed to be. She spent her final hour on the station reviewing everything she knew about the hegemony species. The information was limited. They had deliberately kept themselves isolated from Council space, claiming to prefer independence to integration. Now Elena realized that isolation had been strategic, giving them time to prepare for this moment while the rest of the galaxy grew soft and complacent. The Aurora arrived exactly on schedule, its sleek hull bearing the simple blue and white insignia of Earth's diplomatic corps. As Elena settled into her cabin for the journey home, she pulled up the passenger manifest and felt a chill run down her spine. Every human ambassador, military attaché, and cultural liaison was being recalled simultaneously. Whatever Earth was planning, it required all of its people to be present for the coming storm. Through her cabin's viewport, Elena watched Kepler Station shrink into the distance, its lights twinkling like stars against the cosmic void. She had called this place home for 5 years, but now it felt like she was seeing it for the last time. The hegemony's war machine was already in motion, and soon those peaceful lights might be extinguished forever. But as the Aurora jumped to hyperspace, carrying her toward an uncertain future, Elena found herself smiling. After 3,000 years of peace, humanity was about to remember what it was truly capable of. The great assembly hall on Earth had never witnessed such chaos in its 1,000-year history. Representatives from 47 different species filled the massive amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of panic that echoed off the chamber's crystalline walls. Elena took her seat in the human delegation section, watching as some of the galaxy's most dignified beings reduced themselves to the equivalent of terrified children. The Zephyrian War Minister, Kethvar, stood at the central podium with his iridescent wings spread wide in distress. His melodic voice carried across the chamber as he outlined their species' grim assessment of the situation. The Zephyrians had always prided themselves on maintaining the most advanced military in the galaxy, yet their preliminary analysis of hegemony capabilities was deeply troubling. The enemy possessed technology that shouldn't exist, weapons that violated several known laws of physics, and a fleet size that suggested centuries of secret preparation. Elena listened with growing unease as Kethvar described intercepted transmissions from hegemony scout ships. These weren't the raiders or pirates that occasionally troubled the outer rim. The hegemony had developed quantum disruptors that could tear apart molecular bonds at the atomic level, gravity weapons that could crush entire space stations, and something called reality anchors that prevented faster-than-light travel in affected areas. Their ships were massive, built for conquest rather than exploration, with armor plating that seemed to absorb energy weapons and redirect the power to their own systems. The Crystalline Collective's representative, a being of living gemstone named Prism Singer of Depths, resonated with harmonic frequencies that translated into barely controlled terror. Their species had run probability calculations on potential resistance efforts, and every scenario ended in defeat within 6 months. The hegemony's fleet was simply too large, too advanced, and too ruthless for the peaceful species of the inner galaxy to resist. Even combined, their military forces were designed for exploration and peacekeeping, not the total warfare that the hegemony promised to bring. The ethereal mind, known as consciousness touching stars, materialized as a shimmering cloud of energy above the assembly, its thoughts broadcasting directly into every mind present. Its ancient wisdom spoke of cycles observed over millions of years, patterns of peace and war that swept across galaxies like cosmic seasons. The current age of peace was ending, it declared, and the violent species would always eventually consume the peaceful ones unless something fundamental changed about the balance of power. Elena found herself studying the faces and forms around her, seeing genuine terror in beings she had always considered supremely confident. The tall, graceful Ilari were known for their strategic brilliance, yet their delegation sat in stunned silence. The robust Threnodi had once been warriors themselves before embracing philosophy and art, but even they seemed overwhelmed by the scope of the threat. Only the humans maintained an odd calm that several other species had begun to notice. Director Harrison rose from the human delegation and approached the central podium with measured steps. His appearance caused a subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. Conversations died down as representatives turned their attention to the species that had served as mediator for the galaxy's longest period of peace. Elena felt a surge of pride watching her director command the room's attention without saying a word. "Honored representatives," Harrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I understand the fear that grips you. The hegemony represents an existential threat unlike anything our peaceful coalition has faced. But I want you to remember something important. Humanity has lived through 3,000 years of peace, not because we forgot how to fight, but because we chose not to." A ripple of confusion passed through the assembly. Several representatives exchanged glances, clearly puzzled by the distinction Harrison was drawing. The Zephyrian War Minister tilted his head in the characteristic gesture his species made when processing unexpected information. Harrison continued, his tone growing stronger. "You see us as diplomats, mediators, peacekeepers. You're not wrong, but you're not seeing the complete picture. Earth never stopped preparing for this day because humanity learned long ago that peace is not the absence of war. It's the presence of strength that makes war unnecessary. While you converted your fleets to cargo vessels, we maintained ours in perfect readiness. While you turned weapons factories into art galleries, we kept ours hidden but functional." Elena felt her pulse quicken as Harrison's words sank in. The mysterious drills she had participated in throughout her career, the cultural preservation facilities that seemed oddly well defended, the human colonies and remote systems that never seemed quite as peaceful as they claimed to be. Suddenly it all made sense. The chamber erupted in a mixture of hope and suspicion. The crystalline collective's harmonic resonance shifted to frequencies Elena had never heard before, while the Threnody delegation began rapid whispered consultations among themselves. The ethereal mind's energy signature fluctuated wildly as it processed this revelation about humanity's true nature. "Impossible," declared War Minister Kethvar, his wings folding and unfolding in agitation. "The peace accord signed 3 millennia ago required complete disarmament of all member species. Humanity was the primary architect of those agreements. You cannot have been violating them for 3,000 years." Harrison smiled, and Elena felt a chill run down her spine at the expression. It wasn't the warm, diplomatic smile she was accustomed to seeing from human officials. This smile held something darker, more predatory. "We never violated the accords," he replied. "We simply maintained capabilities that the accords never explicitly addressed. Underground factories, hidden reserves, research programs disguised as historical studies. We learned from watching the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy that peace is fragile, and the only way to preserve it is to be ready when it ends." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Some species reacted with relief at the prospect of hidden human strength, while others seemed disturbed by the implications of deception that had lasted for millennia. Elena found herself reassessing every aspect of human policy she had ever implemented, wondering how much of their peaceful facade had been carefully constructed theater. Harrison gestured toward the massive display screen that dominated one wall of the chamber. With a few commands from his personal device, the screen came alive with data that made the assembled representatives gasp in unison: fleet positions, weapon specifications, production capabilities, personnel numbers. It was a complete military assessment that revealed humanity's true strength for the first time in 3,000 years. The numbers were staggering. Hidden shipyards and asteroid fields had been producing warships disguised as mining vessels. Research stations had been developing weapons technology under the cover of scientific exploration. Human colonies on remote worlds had been training military forces while officially engaged in agricultural development. The scale of the operation suggested that a significant portion of humanity had been living double lives for millennia. "This is how we kept the peace," Harrison concluded, his eyes scanning the shocked faces before him. Not through weakness, but through the promise of overwhelming retaliation against any species that threatened the stability we all cherished. The hegemony made a critical error in their intelligence gathering. They see only what we wanted them to see, a species of soft diplomats who have forgotten how to fight. They have no idea what they've actually declared war against. Elena stood in the observation deck of the hidden Luna Base Alpha, staring at a sight that shattered every assumption she had ever held about her own species. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum, She watched hundreds of sleek warships emerging from concealed hangars carved deep into the moon's surface. These vessels bore no resemblance to the peaceful exploration craft and diplomatic transports she had known throughout her career. Instead, they were angular predators of space, their hulls covered in weapon arrays and armor plating that seemed to drink in the light of distant stars. Commander Sarah Chen approached Elena's position, her military uniform crisp and bearing insignia that Elena had never seen before. The woman moved with the confident stride of someone who had trained for combat her entire life. Yet Elena knew her official records listed Chen as a cultural attaché to the Centauri colonies. The depth of the deception was breathtaking. How many humans were living these secret lives, maintaining the galaxy's peace through hidden strength? "I know this is overwhelming," Chen said, her voice gentle despite the hardened expression she wore. "Most civilians never learn about the Shadow Fleet until Activation Day. We've been hoping this moment would never come. But humanity has been preparing for the hegemony's arrival for the last 2 centuries. Elena turned from the window, her diplomatic training struggling to process what she was witnessing. 2 centuries? How long have you known they were coming? Chen's expression darkened. Our deep space monitoring stations detected the first signs of hegemony expansion in 2847. Their species had been systematically conquering and enslaving civilizations beyond the galactic rim, growing stronger with each victory. We realized it was only a matter of time before they turned their attention to council space. So we began preparations, quietly, carefully, without alerting the other species who might have panicked and destabilized the peace we were protecting. Through the observation deck's speakers, Elena could hear the controlled chaos of a massive military operation coming online. Orders were being transmitted to fleet commanders across human space. Activation codes were being sent to sleeper facilities, and personnel who had spent decades living as civilians were reporting to duty stations that officially didn't exist. The scope of the operation suggested that millions of humans had been part of this hidden military infrastructure. The hegemony made a critical error, Chen continued, gesturing toward the emerging fleet. They studied us through our public records, diplomatic interactions, and cultural exchanges. They see a species that has embraced pacifism and grown soft through millennia of peace. They have no idea that humanity learned the most important lesson of galactic politics. True strength hides until the moment it's needed. Elena watched as a massive dreadnought slowly rotated past their position, its hull bristling with weapon systems that looked distinctly non-human in origin. Where did all this technology come from? Some of those ships look like they use hegemony design principles. Chen smiled grimly. We've been studying them longer than they've been studying us. Every wreck recovered from their expansion wars, every refugee who escaped their conquered territories, every piece of intelligence gathered by deep cover operatives. We've used it all to understand their capabilities and develop countermeasures. Humanity didn't just prepare to fight the hegemony. We prepared to beat them at their own game. The commander led Elena through corridors that had been carved from lunar rock and reinforced with materials that seemed to bend light around them. The base extended far deeper than Elena had imagined possible, with levels dedicated to ship construction, weapons development, training facilities, and command centers that coordinated operations across hundreds of star systems. The scale was staggering. This single hidden base represented a larger military investment than most species had made in their entire recorded history. How many people know? Elena asked as they passed a hangar where technicians worked on fighters that moved without any visible propulsion system. About 40% of humanity is directly involved in the Shadow Fleet infrastructure, Chen replied matter-of-factly. Another 30% work in support roles without knowing the full scope of what they're supporting. The remaining 30% are genuine civilians who live normal lives within our peaceful society. We needed that authenticity to maintain the deception. Elena felt a strange mix of pride and unease at the revelation. Humanity had successfully maintained galactic peace through strength, while allowing most of their own people to live genuinely peaceful lives. It was an impressive balancing act, but it also meant that the species she thought she knew was actually something else entirely. They entered a vast command center where holographic displays showed the movement of both human and hegemony forces across the galaxy. Elena could see that the Shadow Fleet was already deploying to intercept the enemy advance, moving with precision that suggested they had rehearsed these maneuvers countless times. The hegemony's ships appeared as red markers pushing aggressively toward Council space, while human forces appeared as blue markers moving to meet them. The other species still don't understand what's happening, Chen explained, indicating the tactical display. They see our deployment and think we're sending our entire fleet to certain destruction. What they don't realize is that what they've been calling our entire fleet for 3,000 years was actually just our diplomatic escort service. Our real fleet has been waiting in the shadows. Elena studied the numbers on the display and felt her breath catch. The Shadow Fleet outnumbered the hegemony's invasion force by nearly 3-1, and that was only the ships currently in active deployment. Reserve fleets were powering up across human space. Construction facilities were accelerating production of new vessels, and civilian infrastructure was seamlessly converting to military support roles. The hegemony believes they're facing a galaxy of peaceful species protected by a token human military presence, Chen continued. They're about to discover that they've declared war on the one species that never stopped preparing for this exact moment. Their intelligence gathering was thorough but fundamentally flawed. They studied our public face while ignoring the shadows where our real strength has been growing for millennia. Elena walked to the command center's primary display, where the scope of humanity's hidden preparation became clear. Secret research facilities had developed weapons that made the hegemony's technology look primitive. Hidden academies had trained millions of officers in advanced warfare techniques. Covert operations had placed human agents throughout hegemony space, ready to strike at critical infrastructure when the war began. This changes everything, Elena whispered, her diplomatic mind racing through the implications. The other species will never trust us again once they learn about this deception. Chen nodded gravely. Perhaps. But they'll be alive to feel that distrust, and sometimes that's the best outcome you can achieve. Humanity made a choice 3,000 years ago to bear the burden of protecting galactic peace even if it meant living a lie. We became the guardians that the galaxy needed, not the friends they wanted. As if summoned by their conversation, Director Harrison's voice echoed through the command center, transmitted from the emergency council session still ongoing on Earth's surface. His words carried the weight of 3 millennia of careful planning, finally coming to fruition. The time for hiding was over, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what they truly were. Not just diplomats and peacekeepers, but warriors who had chosen to sheathe their swords until the moment they were truly needed. Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution's edge, watching through the viewscreen as the hegemony's first assault wave approached the Kepler system. For 50 years, he had maintained the cover identity of a simple cargo hauler, moving diplomatic supplies between human colonies while secretly commanding one of the Shadow Fleet's most advanced warships. Today, the pretense ended, and Admiral Kane could finally be the warrior he had trained his entire life to become. The hegemony fleet was impressive, 300 vessels of varying sizes, their hulls gleaming with exotic metals and energy signatures that spoke of weapons capable of cracking planets. Their formation showed tactical sophistication, with heavy dreadnoughts protected by clouds of smaller attack craft, while specialized vessels hung back with sensor arrays that probed for weaknesses in the system's defenses. These were not raiders or opportunists. They were professional conquerors who had perfected their craft across dozens of previous campaigns. Enemy fleet composition confirmed, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss, the ship's tactical officer. 12 heavy dreadnoughts, 47 battlecruisers, 81 destroyers, and 160 fighter craft. They're maintaining standard hegemony assault formation, exactly as our intelligence predicted. Kane nodded, satisfied that decades of covert observation had provided accurate data about enemy tactics. The hegemony approached warfare like a science, using overwhelming force and brutal efficiency to crush resistance before it could organize. Against most civilizations, this strategy had proven devastatingly effective. Unfortunately for them, they had never faced an opponent that had studied their methods for over 2 centuries. Signal the fleet, Kane ordered. Decloak on my mark and implement stratagem Omega-7. Around the Retribution's edge, space itself seemed to shimmer as 200 human warships dropped their cloaking field simultaneously. The advanced stealth technology, developed from captured ethereal mind energy manipulation techniques, had allowed the Shadow Fleet to position themselves in perfect ambush formation while remaining completely invisible to hegemony sensors. The enemy's confident advance suddenly faltered as they found themselves surrounded by an enemy force that shouldn't have existed. Kane watched with grim satisfaction as chaos erupted through the hegemony formation. Their communications channels exploded with confused reports as ship commanders tried to understand how they had walked into such a perfect trap. The humans had used the enemy's own tactical doctrine against them. The hegemony's preference for concentrated formations made them vulnerable to encirclement, especially when they couldn't detect the encircling force until it was too late. Target acquisition complete, Voss reported, her hands dancing across control surfaces that had been designed for precisely this moment. All enemy vessels marked and assigned to strike groups. Weapons systems show green across the board. The moment of truth had arrived. For 3,000 years, humanity had maintained peace through the promise of retaliation that no enemy had ever forced them to fulfill. Today, that promise would be kept, and the galaxy would learn what human warfare looked like when conducted without restraint or mercy. All ships, engage, Kane commanded. The darkness of space erupted in brilliant destruction as the Shadow Fleet opened fire. Human weapons technology, developed in secret and tested only in hidden facilities, proved devastatingly effective against hegemony armor and shields. Plasma accelerators tore through enemy hulls like paper. Gravity missiles collapsed defensive barriers, and quantum disruptors turned the enemy's own weapons against them by destabilizing their power systems. Kane watched as the first hegemony dreadnought, a massive vessel that had probably conquered entire star systems, simply came apart under concentrated human fire. Its armor plating, designed to absorb energy weapons, was useless against kinetic projectiles accelerated to near light speed by human railgun technology. The ship's death was swift but spectacular, its reactor core breach creating a miniature star that briefly illuminated the battlefield. Enemy attempting to reform battle lines, Voss reported, her voice steady despite the carnage filling the view screen. Their heavy units are clustering for mutual protection while fighters break off to engage our flanks. Kane smiled coldly. The hegemony was falling back on standard defensive tactics, exactly as human war games had predicted. Implement Phase 2. Deploy the Wraith squadrons and activate the interference field. New contacts appeared on the tactical display as previously hidden human fighters decloaked throughout the hegemony formation. These weren't the standard fighters that other species used for patrol duty. They were purpose-built killers equipped with stealth technology that made them nearly impossible to track, and weapons that could cripple ships 100 times their size. The Wraith pilots had spent decades training for this moment, studying hegemony weaknesses and developing tactics that exploited every flaw in their enemy's defenses. Simultaneously, specialized human vessels activated systems that generated massive electromagnetic interference across the battlefield. The field selectively disrupted hegemony communication and targeting systems while leaving human equipment unaffected, thanks to hardening techniques developed specifically for this conflict. Suddenly, the professional conquerors found themselves fighting blind and deaf against an enemy that could see everything. The battle's tide turned decisively in humanity's favor. Hegemony ships that had dominated every previous engagement found themselves outgunned, outmaneuvered, and completely overwhelmed by human tactical superiority. Their formation collapsed as individual captains lost contact with overall command, while human strike groups methodically eliminated enemy vessels with surgical precision. "Admiral," Voss called out, her voice carrying a note of amazement, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 hegemony vessels. Their fleet commander is asking for terms." Kane considered the request for a moment, then made a decision that would echo through history. "Inform the hegemony commander that humanity doesn't accept surrenders from those who offer none to others. Any vessel attempting to flee the system will be destroyed. Those that wish to survive this engagement can power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded." The message sent ripples of shock through the hegemony fleet. These species were accustomed to fighting civilizations that observed rules of warfare, codes of conduct, and diplomatic protocols. They had never faced an enemy that fought with their own ruthless efficiency, untempered by the mercy they themselves had never shown. As the battle reached its conclusion, Kane surveyed the devastation his fleet had wrought. Of the 300 hegemony vessels that had entered the system, only 47 remained functional, and those were heavily damaged hulks drifting powerless through space. The professional conquerors had been conquered by an enemy they had never understood. "Signal Fleet Command," Kane ordered. "Phase 1 complete. Kepler system secured with minimal friendly casualties. Proceeding to Phase 2 objectives according to schedule. Elena, watching the battle's conclusion from her position in the Luna Base Command Center, felt a complex mixture of pride and horror. Humanity had revealed itself to be devastatingly effective at warfare, but the ease with which they had destroyed a force that terrified the rest of the galaxy was almost as frightening as it was reassuring. The species she thought she knew had just demonstrated capabilities that redefined the balance of power in the galaxy, and she wondered what other secrets her people had been keeping in the shadows of their peaceful facade. Supreme War Chancellor Vexthar stood motionless in his command chamber, aboard the massive fortress ship Eternal Dominion, his compound eyes reflecting the crimson emergency lights that bathed the bridge in an ominous glow. The chittering sounds of his nervous staff filled the space around him, as junior officers struggled to process reports that defied everything they understood about galactic warfare. The humans, those soft diplomats who had spent 3 millennia mediating disputes and arranging trade agreements, had just obliterated an entire hegemony assault fleet in less than 4 hours. The tactical display before Vexthar showed the aftermath of what should have been a routine conquest. The Kepler system, chosen as their first major target specifically because it housed important diplomatic facilities, had become a graveyard for hegemony ambitions. 300 warships had entered the system with absolute confidence, only to be systematically destroyed by an enemy force that had appeared from nowhere and fought, with a level of technological sophistication that the hegemony's best analysts were struggling to explain. Status report, Vexthar demanded, his voice carrying the authority that had conquered 17 different civilizations over the past 2 centuries. His senior tactician, a scarred veteran named Krexthor, approached with obvious reluctance. War Chancellor, our reconnaissance fleet has confirmed the destruction of Admiral Zekvar's entire force. Only 47 vessels survived, and those were captured intact by human boarding parties. Initial analysis of the engagement suggests the humans employed stealth technology, far superior to our own, weapon systems we have never encountered, and tactical coordination that indicates extensive prior knowledge of our capabilities. Vexthar's mandibles clicked together in frustration. Impossible. Our intelligence network has monitored human activities for over a century. They possess a small defensive fleet designed for peacekeeping, not conquest. Their largest military vessels are converted cargo haulers used for humanitarian missions. Krexthor gestured toward the holographic replay of the battle, his own confusion evident. That appears to have been deliberate misdirection, War Chancellor. The fleet that engaged our forces showed no resemblance to known human military assets. These vessels were purpose-built warships utilizing technology that should not exist. Our weapons, which have proven effective against every previous enemy, barely scratched their armor plating. The implications sent ripples of unease through Vexthar's consciousness. The hegemony had built their entire conquest strategy around careful intelligence gathering and overwhelming force applied against weaker opponents. They studied potential enemies for decades, mapping their capabilities and identifying weaknesses that could be exploited. The idea that a species could successfully hide their true military strength for centuries was nearly incomprehensible. Show me the weapon analysis, Vexthar ordered, his compound eyes focusing on the technical displays that materialized around him. What he saw challenged everything the hegemony believed about human technology. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to velocities that violated known physics, energy weapons that seemed to ignore conventional shielding, and defensive systems that operated on principles their scientists couldn't identify. Most disturbing, War Chancellor, Krexthor continued, is the evidence of long-term preparation specifically targeting our forces. Human weapons appear designed to exploit weaknesses in our armor composition. Their tactics countered our standard formations perfectly, and they demonstrated detailed knowledge of our communication protocols. This was not a defensive response, it was a carefully planned ambush that had been prepared for decades. The command chamber fell silent as the full scope of their miscalculation became clear. The hegemony had declared war on what they believed to be a galaxy of peaceful species, protected by token human peacekeeping forces. Instead, they had challenged an enemy that had been studying them while pretending to be something else entirely. Vexthar turned his attention to the communication console where intercepted human transmissions provided even more disturbing intelligence. The victory at Kepler was not humanity's desperate final stand. It was merely the opening move in a larger strategy. Human fleets were deploying throughout hegemony space, emerging from hidden bases and striking at targets that intelligence had assured him were undefended. The Proxima colony, reported his intelligence chief, a nervous creature whose species had been absorbed into the hegemony 50 years earlier. Our garrison force reported human ships materializing in their system 3 hours ago. 60 vessels against our 40-ship defensive fleet. The engagement lasted 20 minutes. Total destruction of hegemony forces. Similar reports flooded in from across their territory. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were conducting simultaneous offensive operations against multiple hegemony holdings, displaying the kind of strategic coordination that required massive hidden infrastructure. Naval bases that had taken decades to construct were being eliminated by enemies who seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum damage. War Chancellor, called another officer. His voice barely controlled panic. We're receiving priority communications from the Supreme Commanders. They're ordering immediate withdrawal of all forward elements and consolidation of forces around the core systems. Vexthar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The Supreme Commanders never ordered retreats. The hegemony's entire reputation was built on relentless forward momentum, the psychological impact of unstoppable conquest that broke enemy morale before battles were even fought. A retreat would signal weakness to every species they had subjugated, potentially triggering rebellions across their empire. But the alternative was even worse. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that made continued offensive operations suicide. Every hegemony fleet sent against human targets was being destroyed or captured, while human forces struck with impunity at targets throughout their territory. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted dramatically in the space of a single day. Implement Protocol 7, Vexthar finally ordered, the words bitter in his mouth. All offensive operations are suspended. Fleet elements are to return to defensive positions around core worlds. Initiate maximum security protocols for all communications and strategic facilities. As his orders rippled out through the hegemony command structure, Vexthar found himself facing a reality that challenged everything his species believed about warfare. They had encountered an enemy that fought with their own ruthlessness, but possessed technological and tactical superiority that made victory impossible. The humans had revealed themselves to be apex predators disguised as herbivores, and the hegemony had walked directly into their trap. The irony was not lost on him. The hegemony had built their empire by studying their enemies and exploiting their weaknesses. But they had been studied in turn by an opponent who had hidden their preparations so thoroughly that even extensive intelligence gathering had failed to detect the threat. Now they faced the choice between suicidal continuation of a war they couldn't win, or humiliating retreat from the first serious defeat in their civilization's history. Looking at the tactical displays showing human forces advancing through hegemony space like an unstoppable tide, Vexthar realized that the galaxy's long peace had not been maintained by weakness, but by strength so overwhelming that it had never needed to be fully displayed. The humans had not grown soft during their centuries of diplomacy. They had been sharpening themselves into the perfect weapon while convincing everyone else they had forgotten how to fight. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the holographic war room aboard the command ship Prometheus Rising, watching in real time as human forces systematically dismantled the hegemony's military infrastructure across 36 star systems. The three-dimensional display showed a galaxy-wide campaign that was proceeding with the mechanical precision of a well-rehearsed symphony, each movement carefully coordinated to maximize psychological impact while minimizing unnecessary destruction. 2 weeks had passed since the revelation of humanity's true capabilities, and the results exceeded even the most optimistic projections from the Shadow Fleet's war planners. The hegemony, which had seemed invincible just days earlier, was crumbling under the weight of an enemy they had never understood. Their fleets were being captured or destroyed faster than they could mount organized resistance, while human forces advanced through their territory with the confidence of predators who had finally revealed themselves to their prey. Status report on Operation Cascade, Chen requested, her attention focusing on the strategic overview that dominated the center of the holographic display. The operation's name was deliberately chosen, like a cascade failure in a complex system. The collapse of hegemony resistance was accelerating as each victory made the next one easier to achieve. Commander Torres, the fleet's intelligence coordinator, gestured toward the display as new data streams updated the tactical picture. Phase 3 objectives achieved ahead of schedule, Admiral. The hegemony's primary shipyards in the Vortex Nebula have been secured intact, along with their quantum foundries and prototype development facilities. Resistance was minimal. Most of their defensive fleets had already been recalled to core systems, leaving the industrial infrastructure essentially undefended. Chen nodded with satisfaction. The human strategy had been designed to exploit the hegemony's centralized command structure and aggressive tactical doctrine. By striking simultaneously at multiple targets, they had forced the enemy into a defensive posture that played directly into humanity's strengths. While hegemony forces concentrated around their most important worlds, human strike teams methodically captured or destroyed everything else. The psychological warfare component was proving equally effective. Human commanders had made a point of broadcasting the aftermath of major engagements throughout hegemony space, ensuring that every civilian and military officer could see the efficiency with which their supposedly invincible forces were being defeated. The species that had built their empire on fear were learning what it felt like to be afraid. "What about the core systems?" Chen asked. Studying the inner regions of hegemony space where their most powerful fleets had gathered for a final stand. "Intelligence indicates increasing panic among civilian populations and growing discord within the military command structure," Torres replied. "Intercepted communications suggest that several species within the hegemony are questioning the leadership's decision to declare war on humanity. Some are already discussing surrender terms or potential defection to human-controlled territory." Chen smiled grimly. The hegemony's multi-species empire was held together by the promise of sharing in the spoils of conquest and the fear of what would happen to those who resisted their rule. With those conquests ending and human forces demonstrating superior military capabilities, the fragile loyalty that bound their empire was beginning to fracture. The holographic display zoomed in on the hegemony's capital system, where Supreme War Chancellor Vexthar had concentrated nearly half of their remaining fleet strength around the fortress world of Dominion Prime. Intelligence estimates suggested over 800 warships defending the system, along with orbital weapons platforms and planetary defense networks that had been strengthened continuously over the past 2 centuries. "Admiral," called Captain Rodriguez from the communications station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Director Harrison wants to speak with you directly." Chen accepted the connection, and Harrison's familiar face appeared in a smaller holographic window beside the tactical display. His expression carried the weight of someone making decisions that would reshape galactic civilization, but Chen could see satisfaction beneath the gravity of his demeanor. "Sarah, I want you to know that the Galactic Council has formally requested that Earth assume leadership of the joint defense effort," Harrison began. "The other species are finally beginning to understand the scope of what humanity has accomplished, and they're asking us to take charge of their own security." The irony wasn't lost on Chen. For 3 millennia, humanity had maintained the peace from the shadows, carefully managing galactic politics to prevent exactly the kind of conflict they were now fighting. Now the other species were acknowledging what had always been true, that human strength was the foundation upon which galactic civilization rested. "What are our orders regarding the hegemony core systems?" Chen asked. "We have sufficient force projection to begin direct assaults, but the casualties on both sides could be significant." Harrison's expression grew thoughtful. "The Council is divided on that question. Some species want complete destruction of hegemony military capabilities to prevent any future threat. Others are concerned about the precedent that would set regarding human dominance in galactic affairs. What's your assessment of the strategic situation?" Chen gestured toward the tactical display showing hegemony force concentrations. "Militarily, we can end this within a month. Their defensive positions are strong, but we have technological and tactical advantages that make victory inevitable. The question is whether we want to completely destroy them or offer terms that allow for their integration into the galactic community under strict supervision." "From a diplomatic perspective," Harrison replied, "complete destruction would terrify the other Council species even more than the revelation of our hidden capabilities already has. We need to demonstrate that human strength is protective, not predatory." Can you achieve surrender without total annihilation? Chen studied the force deployments around Dominion Prime, her tactical mind working through various scenarios. The hegemony's leadership was desperate and cornered, which could make them either more willing to surrender or more likely to fight to mutual destruction. The key would be demonstrating that continued resistance was futile, while offering terms that allowed them to retain some measure of dignity. I have a proposal, Chen said finally. We surround their core systems but don't attack immediately. Instead, we broadcast a complete tactical assessment showing them exactly how hopeless their position is, along with surrender terms that are strict but not genocidal. Give them 72 hours to consider their options, while we position our forces for decisive strikes if they refuse. Harrison nodded approvingly. That aligns with Council preferences and maintains humanity's reputation as protectors rather than conquerors. Implement your plan, Admiral, and Sarah. Make sure they understand that this is their only chance. If they force us to take their core systems by force, the terms afterward will be much less generous. As the communication ended, Chen turned back to the tactical display and began issuing orders that would position the Shadow Fleet for the final phase of Operation Cascade. Around Dominion Prime and the other hegemony core worlds, space itself would soon fill with human warships carrying weapons that could crack planets and warriors who had spent centuries preparing for this exact moment. The galaxy's long peace was ending, but from its ashes would rise a new order, where humanity's protective strength was no longer hidden in shadows, but displayed openly as the ultimate guarantor of civilized stability. The hegemony had wanted to rule through fear and conquest, but they were about to learn that true power belonged to those who were strong enough to choose mercy when victory was already assured. 1 year after the hegemony's unconditional surrender, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood once again in the Great Assembly Hall on Earth, but the chamber bore little resemblance to the panic-stricken gathering that had witnessed humanity's revelation. The same 47 species were represented, but now they sat in orderly rows with expressions of respectful attention rather than terror. At the center of it all, Director Harrison addressed the assembly with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide humanity's true nature. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Within 72 hours of Fleet Admiral Chen's ultimatum, the hegemony's leadership had collapsed into factional infighting that ended with Supreme War Chancellor Vexthar's assassination by his own officers. The various species that had formed the hegemony's empire quickly moved to negotiate separate surrender agreements with human administrators, each eager to distance themselves from their former overlords and demonstrate their usefulness to the new galactic order. Elena watched as Harrison outlined the new security framework that would govern galactic civilization for the foreseeable future. The Galactic Council would continue to handle trade, diplomacy, and cultural affairs, but ultimate authority for military matters would rest with the Terran Defense Coordination, a new organization that openly acknowledged humanity's role as the galaxy's primary military power. The age of hidden strength and secret fleets was over, replaced by transparent dominance that none could question. The former hegemony territories had been reorganized into protectorate systems under direct human administration, their populations undergoing careful rehabilitation programs designed to integrate them into peaceful galactic society. The process was proving more successful than anyone had anticipated. Many species had joined the hegemony out of fear rather than conviction, and they readily embraced the opportunity to live without constant warfare and conquest. The new defense protocols are already showing positive results, Harrison reported to the assembly, his words carrying across the chamber with crystal clarity. Piracy incidents have dropped by 97%. Territorial disputes have been resolved through arbitration rather than force, and our monitoring systems have detected no military buildups or aggressive preparations anywhere in Council space. Elena reflected on how much her own role had changed over the past year. No longer simply a diplomatic representative, she now served as humanity's primary liaison with species that were still adjusting to their new reality. Some harbored resentment about the deception that had lasted for millennia, but most had come to appreciate that human protection had allowed their civilizations to flourish in peace. The alternative, domination by the hegemony or similar aggressive powers, was too terrible to contemplate. The Zephyrian War Minister, Kethavar, rose to address the assembly, his iridescent wings catching the chamber's soft lighting. His species had arguably benefited most from the new order, as their natural warrior instincts had found productive outlet in supporting human peacekeeping operations throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian Republic wishes to formally acknowledge the wisdom of humanity's long stewardship. Kethavar declared, his melodic voice carrying genuine gratitude. We spent centuries believing that our military capabilities were impressive, only to discover that true strength lies not in the weapons you build, but in the restraint you show in using them. Humanity protected us all while allowing us to believe in our own independence, and for that, we are eternally grateful. Similar statements followed from other species representatives, each acknowledging the new reality while expressing appreciation for humanity's benevolent approach to galactic governance. The crystalline collective spoke of harmonic resonance achieving perfect balance, while the ethereal minds praised the elegant efficiency of systems operating according to their intended design. Elena noticed that even the former hegemony species seemed genuinely relieved by their new circumstances. The Crexian delegate, representing one of the hegemony's founding species, spoke openly about the burden their aggressive culture had placed on younger generations who had never wanted to live lives defined by conquest and domination. Our children grow up learning art and science instead of warfare and subjugation, the delegate explained, his reptilian features expressing emotions that Elena was still learning to read. For the first time in our recorded history, we can imagine a future where our legacy will be creation rather than destruction. Harrison concluded the session by announcing the establishment of the Galactic Heritage Project, an ambitious initiative that would document and preserve the cultures of all council species while fostering peaceful interaction and mutual understanding. The project would be funded and administered by humanity, but would celebrate the diversity that made galactic civilization unique and valuable. As the assembly dispersed, Elena found herself approached by Commander Chen, who had transitioned from Fleet Admiral to Director of the new Terran Defense Coordination. The warrior who had orchestrated the hegemony's defeat now wore civilian clothes and spoke with the measured tones of a diplomat, though her eyes still held the sharp awareness of someone who had seen what lurked in the galaxy's darker corners. Any regrets? Chen asked, settling into the seat beside Elena as the chamber emptied around them. Elena considered the question carefully. The galaxy was undeniably safer now, with human military superiority ensuring that no aggressive power could threaten the peace that billions of beings cherished. But the revelation of humanity's hidden nature had fundamentally changed how other species viewed them, replacing partnership with a relationship that was unmistakably hierarchical. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had found another way, Elena replied honestly. A path that could have maintained the peace without the deception, without the fear that some species still harbor about human intentions. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Director Harrison asked me the same question last week. My answer was that we did find another way. We found the way that actually worked. 3,000 years of galactic peace isn't an accident or a temporary anomaly. It was the product of careful planning, hidden strength, and the willingness to make hard choices that others couldn't or wouldn't make. Through the assembly hall's great windows, Elena could see the lights of Geneva spreading toward the horizon, each point of illumination representing millions of humans going about their daily lives in a galaxy that was finally, openly safe. The secret burden that her species had carried for millennia was now shared knowledge, and with that revelation had come both the responsibility and the freedom to guide galactic civilization toward a more secure future. The galaxy needed guardians, Chen continued, rising from her seat and preparing to leave. We became those guardians, even when it meant sacrificing the simpler relationships we might have preferred. History will judge whether we chose correctly, but the alternative was letting the galaxy burn while we maintained comfortable illusions about the nature of peace. As Elena sat alone in the emptying chamber, she reflected on the ultimate irony of humanity's situation. They had revealed themselves to be the galaxy's apex military power, in order to preserve the very peace that had allowed other species to remain innocent of such harsh realities. The price of that protection was eternal vigilance and the knowledge that true peace could only exist when those who cherished it were willing to fight for it. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, But now they shone over a galaxy where children of 100 different species could grow up without fear of conquest or subjugation. It was a worthy legacy for any civilization, even if the cost had been the end of an age where humanity could pretend to be anything other than exactly what they had always been. The guardians who stood watch in the darkness, ensuring that the light of peace would never be extinguished.